My name is Jane from North Carolina, and here is my story. I still remember the day I met him, tall, soft-spoken, and full of ideas. It was a warm spring morning in North Carolina, and I had just started my job at the local government office. I was proud of that job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and for a young woman in her 20s trying to find her footing, it meant everything. He came in one day to process some documents for a university scholarship application. He looked nervous, clearly out of place in the gray walls of government bureaucracy. I helped him with the forms, guided him through the steps, and before I knew it, we were talking, not just about school or paperwork, but about dreams. He told me he wanted to become a teacher, to open a school someday that would give children from poor families a real chance at life. That's what drew me in, his heart. I could see he wasn't chasing money or status, he just wanted to create something meaningful. He came from a tough background, raised by a single mother who worked odd jobs just to put food on the table. He spoke with humility, and his ambition wasn't flashy, it was quiet, patient, and deeply rooted in something real. We started seeing each other after that first meeting. Our connection grew naturally, long walks, late-night conversations, shared meals cooked in my tiny apartment kitchen. He didn't have much. But I never cared. What he lacked in material things, he made up for in love, attention, and vision. I believed in him more than he believed in himself. By the time he entered his final year at the university, we were inseparable. I was already working full-time, and he was juggling school and part-time jobs. His financial situation was getting worse, and it became clear that he might have to drop out if he couldn't pay the remaining tuition. Without hesitation, I stepped in. I used my salary, my savings, and made sure his fees were covered. People around me warned me to be careful. Don't give too much, they said. You never know how people change. But I wasn't worried. I loved him. More than that, I believed in the life we were building together. It felt like we were two parts of a greater purpose, like we had been brought together not just to love, but to build something that mattered. When he finally graduated, I cried. Not just because of what it meant for him, but because it felt like our victory. He held my hand and told me, "I'll never forget what you've done for me. This is just the beginning." And I believed him. Back then, it really did feel like we had everything: love, youth, and an unshakable belief that the future was ours to shape. We were two dreamers standing at the edge of something beautiful. What I didn't know then was how quickly dreams can shift, and how promises, no matter how heartfelt, can sometimes be forgotten. It didn't happen all at once. One tuition fee here, a few textbooks there, some groceries in between. Slowly, I began carrying more weight than I'd expected. But I never complained. Love makes sacrifices feel like choices, not burdens. He had dreams, and I had a steady paycheck. It only made sense. He needed someone to believe in him, and I was willing to be that person. What's a few skipped lunches or delayed personal goals when you're building something bigger together? I told myself that often. I wasn't just paying his bills, I was investing in our future, brick by brick. There were months when my bank account would barely make it past the bills. I'd juggle work and side gigs, picking up weekend hours just to make sure the rent was covered and he had what he needed. He studied hard, and every time he aced a test or came home excited about a lecture, it reassured me that the sacrifice was worth it. I told myself that one day, we'd look back at those struggles and smile, but not everyone understood. Friends drifted away. They couldn't relate to why I was pouring so much into a man who hadn't yet proposed, who wasn't officially committed beyond words. My family voiced their concerns too, subtly at first, then more openly. "You're doing too much," my sister said once. "Let him carry his own load." But I saw something in him that others didn't, a quiet strength, a purpose. I couldn't let him drown when I had a lifeboat. So, I learned to tune out the noise and keep moving forward. I reminded myself that partnerships aren't always 50-50s. Sometimes they're 80-20. Sometimes 100/0. And I was okay being the 100, for now. There were hard nights. Nights when he would be deep in his books. And I'd be staring at a pile of unpaid bills, whispering prayers into the darkness. I never told him how tight things were. I didn't want to distract him from his goal. Instead, I smiled through the strain and told him how proud I was. And I meant it. Every word. I had dreams too, traveling, going back for my master's, maybe starting my own small business. But I quietly put them on a shelf, convincing myself that once he made it, we'd both win. We were a team, right? He finally graduated, and I watched him walk across that stage with pride swelling in my chest. It wasn't just his victory, it was ours. I clapped harder than anyone in that auditorium. I remember thinking, now it begins. All the hard work, the quiet sacrifices, the lonely nights, it's all going to be worth it. I believed that with everything in me. What I didn't know was that sometimes, love given in silence can be taken for granted. And the future you build for two can slowly become a dream lived by only one. Graduation brought a new wave of hope. With his degree in hand, we both looked ahead with excitement, ready to turn years of sacrifice into something tangible. He didn't want to pursue teaching in the public system. Instead, he dreamed bigger, starting a private school of his own. A place where learning wouldn't be limited by bureaucracy, where children from all backgrounds could thrive. His passion was contagious, and I caught the vision easily, but dreams cost money. And we didn't have any. He had no capital, no property, no savings. But I had one thing that could open doors: my credit score. We sat at our small kitchen table night after night, mapping out plans, doing research, calculating costs. Every figure we wrote down made the dream seem further away. Still, I believed in him. I believed in us. So, I took a leap of faith. I applied for a personal loan under my name, one big enough to cover rent for a building, renovations, school supplies, and basic salaries. I didn't tell my family until it was done. I already knew what they would say. But I was too far in to turn back. This wasn't just his dream anymore, it had become our project, our shared legacy. We found a modest building on the outskirts of town. It needed work, peeling paint, broken windows, cracked floors, but it had space and potential. We spent weeks cleaning it up together. I would wake up early, prep the kids for school, put in hours at my government job, and then head to the school site in the evenings, often with a baby on my hip and paperwork in hand. I was tired, but I was proud. We started with just a few students, children from the neighborhood whose parents took a chance on our tiny school. I handled the admin and logistics when I could, while he focused on teaching and curriculum. Every coin mattered. We reused books, borrowed furniture, and operated on hope and determination. It wasn't easy. We had 3 young children of our own, bills to pay, and a growing business to keep alive. I was constantly stretched thin, between motherhood, my full-time job, and helping with the school. There were nights I'd cry in the shower from exhaustion, then dry my face and get back to work like nothing happened, but through it all, I held on to the dream. I told myself this was the season of struggle before the season of harvest. We were doing something meaningful. We were building a future, not just for our children, but for others too. And in those early days, even with all the stress, there was a certain joy in seeing something come to life from the ground up. We had started with nothing, and now we had a school, humble, imperfect, but ours. At least, that's what I thought. As the school grew, we needed help. Enrollments were increasing, and the workload became overwhelming. My husband suggested bringing in his younger sister, Leah, to assist with administration and front desk duties. At first, I didn't object. Family was family. And we needed all the support we could get. She was in her early 20s, fresh out of college, and looking for work. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for her, and for us, but from the beginning, something didn't sit right. Leah moved through the school with a sense of entitlement, acting more like a partner than an assistant. She questioned decisions I made, rolled her eyes during meetings, and often forgot to update me on important matters. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she just needed time to adjust. Maybe she felt the pressure and was reacting poorly, but it wasn't just me. Staff started coming to me quietly, complaining about her behavior, how she talked down to them. dismissed their concerns, and created an environment of tension and confusion. Still, I urged patience. She's young, I told them. She'll grow into the role. But Leah didn't grow. She dug in. She had a way of twisting things to make me look like the outsider. If I enforced a rule or corrected an issue, I became the controlling wife. She whispered in my husband's ear about things I supposedly said or did, things that never happened. Slowly, I noticed his attitude shifting. He became distant during meetings, questioned my input more often, and defended her without hesitation. I started to feel like a guest in my own business. One day, I walked into the office and found Leah sitting at my desk, going through files I had locked. She smiled as if nothing was wrong and said, "Oh, I thought I'd help reorganize." That was the moment I realized, this wasn't just immaturity or inexperience. There was resentment beneath the surface. Deep, personal, and rooted in something I couldn't understand. I began to reflect on every past interaction. Maybe she saw me as the outsider, the woman who saved her brother, the one who had control over the family's biggest success. Maybe she thought I stood in the way of something she believed should have been hers. What hurt the most wasn't just her hostility, it was that my husband refused to see it. Every time I raised a concern, he brushed it off. "You're overthinking," he'd say. "Leah means well. You two just need time to bond." But time only made things worse. We had built this school together from the ground up, but now I was being edged out by someone who hadn't shed a drop of sweat for it. I kept quiet for the sake of peace, hoping he'd eventually see what was happening, but in silence, resentment grows. And mine was starting to take root, quietly, painfully, and deeply. The school flourished faster than we ever imagined. Within 2 years, we had full classrooms, a waiting list, and a growing reputation in the community. Parents trusted us, students thrived, and the money, finally, started pouring in. What once felt like a fragile dream now looked like a solid, profitable enterprise, but with success came a shift I hadn't expected. My husband changed. At first, it was subtle: the new suits, the unexplained late nights, the sudden business trips that didn't involve me. I told myself not to be paranoid. After all, we were expanding, and with growth came responsibilities. He deserved to enjoy the fruits of his labor, I reasoned, but the signs became too loud to ignore. He grew distant at home. Conversations became surface level. He barely acknowledged the kids when he walked through the door. I would stay up waiting, pretending to be asleep when he came home reeking of perfume I didn't wear. My heart knew before my mind was ready to accept it. Then one night, I got the call. A woman's voice, cold and deliberate, told me everything. "I thought you should know your husband is the father of my child." My chest tightened. I wanted to believe it was a cruel prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. She wasn't the only one either. Over the next few months, rumors turned into truths. 2 more women. 2 more children. Each revelation was a dagger to the chest. I confronted him. At first, he denied it. Then, when denial no longer held water, he confessed, but only partially, as if hiding behind half-truths would soften the blow. "They meant nothing," he said, "it just happened." He blamed the stress, the pressure, even me, for being too focused on work and the kids. I was shattered. Not just because of the betrayal, but because I had built my entire life around someone who could lie with such ease. And yet, I stayed. People might say I was weak. But it wasn't weakness, it was the weight of motherhood, of shared history, of love that had been planted and watered for years. I wasn't ready to uproot it just yet. My Christian faith urged me toward forgiveness. I told myself that maybe this was a test. Maybe he would change if he saw how deeply he had hurt me. We agreed to try again. I demanded boundaries, honesty, counseling. He agreed, though half-heartedly. I saw the cracks, but I patched them up with hope and prayer. I told myself that families were meant to endure storms, that love was still possible, but deep inside, something had shifted. A part of me had started to close, a quiet voice inside reminding me that love without loyalty is just illusion, and illusions don't last forever. After the storm of betrayal settled into an uneasy calm, He came to me with a new idea, one that he claimed would change everything. He wanted to expand the school model to Europe, starting in Dublin, Ireland. "It's the perfect opportunity," he said, eyes lit with excitement. "Private education is booming there, and our success here proves the model works. If we take this global, we can secure our children's future." I didn't share his enthusiasm, not at first. We were barely steady after everything that had happened. Trust was still cracked, and healing hadn't yet taken root. But he was persuasive. He spoke of opportunity, growth, and redemption. "Let me go ahead and set things up," he said. "Once it's stable, we can relocate the whole family." The idea of a fresh start was tempting. A new country, a new chapter, a clean slate. Still, my instincts were uneasy. But I agreed. For the sake of the family, for the children, and maybe still, somewhere deep inside, for the love I hadn't fully let go of. He left within weeks. I stayed behind, continuing my job with the local government and managing what remained of our school. The enrollment had plateaued, the energy had dipped, and his absence was more than physical. It left a void in every corner of the business. To make matters worse, his sister Leah was still involved in daily operations, and our relationship hadn't improved. Every morning, I woke up before the sun, got the kids ready, went to work, and then spent my evenings at the school reviewing accounts, managing staff issues, and dealing with mounting pressure. I was running on fumes, emotionally and physically. I felt like I was holding up a crumbling building with my bare hands. At first, he called often. Video calls, emails, updates, promising signs. He showed me photos of office spaces, shared potential investor contacts, and said all the right things. "Just a few more months," he promised. "Once we're set up here, we'll reunite." But the calls became less frequent. His updates grew vague. Sometimes days passed with no word. I told myself he was just busy, but that familiar ache in my chest returned, the one I had felt when I first discovered his infidelity. That quiet whisper that something wasn't right. Leah had started making questionable financial decisions. Petty cash would go missing. Vendors complained of late payments. When I confronted her, she shrugged, blamed clerical errors, and reminded me that I wasn't always around to see what went on. I tried to stay focused, for the kids, for the school, for myself. But the weight was crushing. I was the only one holding everything together, and I was starting to crack. Dublin had become his escape, his new beginning. But for me, it was the beginning of a lonely, uphill battle, and deep down, I started to wonder if he had ever intended for me to be part of that dream at all. Everything finally came crashing down. I had ignored the warning signs for too long: missing funds, inconsistent records, unpaid suppliers. I had been too busy juggling motherhood, my full-time job, and the chaos left in the wake of his departure. But eventually, even blind faith runs out. It started with a call from the landlord of our school property. He hadn't received rent in 2 months. That shocked me, because I had authorized payments and had seen the receipts. When I pressed further, the pieces began unraveling. I called the accountant, who admitted, nervously, that Leah had been handling the payments directly and refused to provide proper documentation. My stomach dropped. I rushed to the school and demanded access to the financial records. What I found nearly brought me to my knees. Large withdrawals with no clear purpose, missing receipts, inflated expenses logged under fake vendors. Leah had been embezzling money right under my nose. I confronted her immediately. She didn't deny it. In fact, she barely flinched. "I did what I had to do," she snapped. "Don't act like this school belongs to you. My brother built it. You were just along for the ride." The audacity left me speechless. All those late nights, sacrifices, and tears, reduced to nothing in her eyes. I fired her on the spot, but the damage had already been done. Our accounts were overdrawn, creditors were closing in, and our reputation was in ruins. I tried reaching my husband, desperate for answers, desperate for support. At first, he ignored my calls. Then he replied to a message with a simple, "I'll handle it." But he didn't. He went silent again, leaving me to clean up the mess alone. it was my eldest son who unintentionally revealed the full truth. One evening, he came into the room holding a tablet, his eyes wide. "Mom, is this Dad?" It was a video, one posted by a woman on social media. In it, my husband stood in a bright kitchen, surrounded by 4 children, smiling, laughing, holding a baby. The caption read, "Family time with my love." Grateful for our little Irish blessings, my heart stopped. I clicked through her profile. There were dozens of photos, birthdays, vacations, holidays, all with him front and center, playing the doting father and husband. He hadn't just left us for business. He had built a new life, another family, without ever telling us. I stared at the screen in disbelief, my hands trembling. Everything I had believed, everything I had sacrificed for, collapsed in an instant. He had betrayed me in every way imaginable, professionally, financially, emotionally. And now, I had to face the wreckage of it all alone. The school was gone. The money was gone. And the man I once believed was my partner had erased me from his world like I never existed. There are betrayals that break your heart, and then there are those that awaken your strength. And that night, as I sat in silence with my children sleeping down the hall, I felt something rise in me that had been buried for far too long. The silence after betrayal is deafening. It's not just the absence of a person, it's the void of trust, of routine, of everything you thought you could count on. When the dust settled, I was left standing alone in the ruins of a life I had built with my own hands. The school was gone. The bank seized the building due to unpaid loans. Suppliers hounded me for money I didn't have. My name, my reputation, was tied to everything. And the man who helped build it all had vanished into a new life, thousands of miles away, with a new family and not a shred of accountability. But I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I had 3 children looking up at me with eyes full of confusion and hurt. They asked questions I didn't know how to answer. Why doesn't Daddy call anymore? Will he come back? Did we do something wrong? And I had to swallow my pain, look them in the eye, and reassure them, when I wasn't even sure I believed it myself. So, I did the only thing I could do. I got back up. I returned to my government job full-time, grateful that at least one part of my life had remained stable. I took on extra responsibilities, volunteered for overtime, and slowly began to rebuild financially. Every paycheck mattered. Every saved coin was a victory. I sold what little was left of the school assets to cover part of the debt. I moved us into a smaller apartment, more affordable, more manageable. It wasn't what we were used to, but it was home. A place where we could breathe again. The emotional rebuilding was harder. I carried anger, shame, and sadness like invisible weights on my back. I questioned my judgment, my worth, my strength. How could I have missed the signs? How could someone I loved turn into a stranger so easily? I battled guilt every day, wondering if my children would be okay, if I had failed them by trying too hard to hold a broken family together. But little by little, I found pieces of myself again. Through therapy, I learned to let go of the shame. Through prayer, I began to believe that this pain had purpose. And through my children, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. They needed me to show up, even when I felt empty. So I did. Every day, we started creating new traditions. Movie nights, home-cooked dinners, long walks on weekends. Our little family began to heal, not through grand gestures, but through quiet, consistent love. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. I stopped looking back at the past for answers that didn't exist. I began focusing on the future I could still create, for me, and for my children. Picking up the pieces wasn't easy. But with every step forward, I realized something powerful. I didn't need him to survive. I had already saved myself. Time is a strange healer. It doesn't erase the pain, but it teaches you how to carry it. 10 years passed like the turning pages of a long, quiet book. Slowly, steadily, I rewrote the story of my life. The early years were the hardest. Every day felt like a mountain, every decision weighed down by fear. But I kept moving forward, one small victory at a time. I poured myself into my work, determined to rebuild from the ground up. What started as a job became a career. I earned promotions, took leadership roles, and eventually became a respected figure in the department. Each achievement reminded me that I was more than what had happened to me. I wasn't just someone's ex-wife or a woman left behind. I was capable, resilient, and smart. I learned how to negotiate, how to lead, how to believe in my own voice again. Financially, I became more disciplined than ever. I started saving aggressively, investing wisely, and setting goals not just for survival, but for growth. I bought a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, a place with enough space for my children and peace for myself. Every time I unlocked the front door, it reminded me that I had built this life with no help, just grit, faith, and hard work. My children became my greatest pride. They grew up watching me struggle, but they also saw me rise. I didn't shelter them from the truth, but I never let bitterness guide our conversations. We talked openly about pain, healing, and what it means to love yourself enough to walk away. Each of them carried those lessons in their own way. My daughter blossomed into a confident young woman, fierce and compassionate. My sons became thoughtful, grounded men who valued women and respected hard work. We laughed more as the years went by. The wounds didn't disappear, but they stopped bleeding. We created new memories, filled with warmth and quiet joy. I learned to love the small things again: early morning coffee, music while cooking, late night talks with my daughter on the couch. People often asked me how I did it, how I survived such deep betrayal and loss. I never had a perfect answer. But I knew this: I refused to let someone else's choices define my story. I chose to keep showing up, for my kids, for my future, and most of all, for myself. 10 years ago, I was broken, abandoned, drowning in debt and disappointment. Now, I was thriving, not because someone rescued me, not because everything went perfectly, but because I did the hard work, day by day, to heal and rebuild. I had turned pain into power, grief into growth, and somewhere along the way, I stopped waiting for the past to make sense. I was too busy building a future that finally did. It was a rainy Monday afternoon when the email came through. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, until I saw his name in the subject line. My breath caught for a moment. After 10 years of silence, of raising our children without so much as a card or a dollar in support, he had reappeared. The message was short, written in a tone that wavered between guilt and desperation. "Jane, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to ask for it. I've lost everything. Please. Can we talk?" I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen. His words didn't hurt me, they didn't carry the weight they once would have. Instead, they felt like echoes from another life. A life I had grieved and buried a decade ago. Curious, I did a little digging. His new life in Ireland had crumbled. The woman he left us for had divorced him. Rumors of infidelity, again. He'd lost custody of his children, had declared bankruptcy, and was living in a shelter for a time. The man who once walked out so confidently to build a future had lost everything, not just financially, but personally. Now, he wanted to return. To the same woman he'd betrayed. To the same family he'd abandoned, but I was no longer that woman. 10 years ago, his words might have pulled at my heart. Back then, I would have made excuses, remembered the good times, and tried to fix what he had broken. But now? I was whole. I had stitched myself together with strength, prayer, hard work, and self-respect. I didn't carry the weight of bitterness. I had let go of that long ago. But I also wasn't willing to carry him, not now. Not ever again. He reached out to the kids, too. Their responses were colder than mine. They had grown up in the shadow of his absence, watched me struggle alone, and understood the pain he left behind. They answered only out of curiosity, not hope. In one message, he admitted everything. The lies. The money. The affairs. The regrets. It was his attempt to clear his conscience, but it didn't change the past. I replied only once: "I forgave you a long time ago, not for you, but for me. But that doesn't mean we can go back. I built a life that no longer includes you. I wish you peace, but I no longer owe you anything, not my love, not my time, not my home." And with that, I closed the door, not out of hate, but from strength. Because I had already done the hardest thing, letting go and learning to live again. He had fallen, yes. But I had risen. I had survived the storm, planted new roots, and built a future stronger than anything he had tried to destroy. And as I looked around at the life I had created, with my children grown, my career thriving, and peace in my heart, I knew without a doubt, I had already won. Let's know your thoughts about the story in the comment section. What would you have done if you were in the same shoes? Please like and subscribe to keep the channel growing.